Hello, tribe members. Welcome back. Today, I have the great pleasure of having a registered dietitian on to chat about a proper human diet, eating disorders, and all things dietary in nature. She's been on the channel a couple of times before. I find her to be a great source of knowledge and inspiration, and I think you will too. Let's bring her on. This is Michelle Hurn, registered dietitian. Hey, Michelle.
Hey, Dr. Barry, thanks so much for having me on.
It's a pleasure. I always love chatting with you. So today we're live in our private group, and I'm going to let the tribe members ask you questions kind of as they come. And you and I are going to try to sound intelligent and say smart things in between. First of all, tell people just a 30-second snippet about who you are, your qualifications, and your story.
Yeah, so I am a registered dietitian. I'll try to do the Reader's Digest version. I had a very serious eating disorder when I was 12. I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. I was about 5 feet tall and 57 and a half pounds. So I was immediately put into inpatient treatment. I was on a 24-hour tube feeding system, fed the standard American diet. At the age of 12, I was put on 7 different medications, and I was told that if I did survive, I would never be normal. I was going to have to be a high functioning person with an eating disorder. I was told I would always deal with anxiety, depression, racing thoughts around food, obsession around food. Like that was going to be my lot in life. And that was pretty much true for most of my life. I followed the standard guidelines as best I could. I became a dietitian in 2009 and also an athlete. I was a competitive marathon runner. And so, of course, I had to have all these carbohydrates. And, I went through periods in my life where my anxiety was really bad, depression so severe. I suffered from suicidal ideation, severe self-injury. And then in 2019, I actually pretty much lost my health. I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. My health just fell off a cliff. I went from being able to run 20 miles to I couldn't run 2. I was sweating. I was working at the hospital at the time. I had panic attacks. I was eating about 400 grams of carbohydrates at the time. Sports dietitians told me to eat more. And then, things went from bad to worse. So adopted the full carnivore diet for 30 days, just with the goal of my whole body hurt, thinking that the extra protein might help my body. And it changed my life. I went from not being able to run at all to within a few months returning to running. And now I run ultra marathons. So I compete in distances longer than 26 miles. I went from having paralyzing anxiety to being calm, sleeping. And, like many people, I became both angry and curious. Like, what is this? As a dietitian, why hasn't anybody taught me? All I had heard was low carb and ketogenic diets are bad for you, or dangerous for your heart, aren't sustainable. And, as a healthcare provider, I had access to clinical trials. And I honestly became angry with just how many clinical trials specifically for type 2 diabetes and metabolic health there are for. Yeah. And then I kind of went on my own journey, wrote the book, The Dietitian's Dilemma, which outlines what a, animal-based, low carb, the proper human diet can do for eating disorders, for mental health, for sarcopenia, for heart disease. And so now I, do my best to advocate, because unfortunately most dietitians are trying to be a little busy, but really behind the science. Let's say that.
Yep. And I'd love to know, and feel free to tell me if we're stepping on touchy ground with your past issues. What made you decide, after all of your training and all of your inpatient and all of that, all the medications, what made you decide to try 30 days of the psycho crazy carnivore diet? Were you a dietitian when you made that decision?
Oh yeah, no, I became a dietitian in 2009.
Where did that come from? And then when you started carnivore, how many days was it before you noticed not only the obvious effects, but also the mental effects of that as well?
Yeah, so I became a dietitian in 2009, and so this was 2019. And also I saw the revolving door sickness in the hospital. People would come in with type 2 diabetes, and then, we'd give them a consistent carb diet and they would get worse. And I was always told, oh, it's just the patient not adhering. And, people with severe mental illness, just did worse. And so, here I am following all the guidelines, and all of a sudden, like I said, my health. And so I call it like my come to Jesus moment. I literally, I couldn't run. Like I said, I'd go out for like a 2-mile run. I'd break out in cold sweats. I had all these lab tests done and nothing was wrong. And then I was working, and I live right outside of Portland, Oregon, in a hospital in acute care. And I covered oncology. And we had a patient pass away, a young patient. And I just, I ended up going home early, fell asleep on the couch, and woke up with just searing pain. Like felt like my body was on fire. Like, and I was out of answers. Like I didn't know what to do. Like I had tried unconventional, kind of weird herbal stuff. I tried medications. I tried some stronger stuff, alcohol, you name it. I tried it. And so, at 3 a.m, I drove to 7-Eleven, got 30 pounds of ice, put it in the bathtub, and just sitting in an ice bath crying. And that's when, my wife came in and was like, we got to do something different. Like, we can't keep doing this. And I was like, yeah, I'm done. I'm never running again. I'm 36. I was 36 at the time. So I had just decided I would give it competitive running. And I intuitively knew that carbohydrates didn't make me feel good. Like I knew I was kind of riding that blood sugar roller coaster, but I was so convinced that they were essential for human nutrition, of course, for being an athlete. And then with a history of an eating disorder, we're always told like you can't eliminate a food group. Like if you do that, then you're not well. Like you will know you're well when you can eat all things in moderation. So I wanted to be quote unquote well. And so, so that was the moment. And then I was just going to adopt a ketogenic diet. That was originally the idea. Cause I thought like, maybe that will help. Like, and I'll do it very, very short term. And then, you kind of go down the rabbit hole and you got on social media and saw several people following the carnivore diet. And I even remember being like, whoa, like that's strange. Like I'm originally from Texas. So I'm a big, I like meats, but I didn't understand why that way of eating could be beneficial. But, just like I would hope most people do is I knew my health was really poor. And there's a lot of people following this way of eating that seem pretty healthy. Yep. So I reached out to several people and said like, you look healthy. I'm not healthy. And that is when I really learned more about bioavailability. That is not taught to us as dietitians, and what that means is what can my body actually use and absorb?
So you're saying that in dietitian school,
yes,
you really don't touch it all on nutrient availability, absorbability, anti-nutrients that could limit absorbability.
When you say it all, I mean, we're taught like, okay, heme iron versus non-heme, like, hey, the iron in meat is more absorbable, but it's also like, well, then just eat more spinach and you'd be able to get the same amount. Like it's kind of taught like that. Like, oh, you can have tofu or steak. They're the same. So it's really brushed over. It's not, I had no idea how powerful animal-based nutrition was, like compared to plant-based nutrition. I had been taught it's about half dozen another. As long as you're getting enough, you're going to be fine. And, as we know, that's absolutely not true. And that's not even what the research says. That's not what the science says.
Correct. So I've got a friend who was diagnosed much like you with an eating disorder when she was very, very young, and went through all the inpatient, outpatient, all the medications, all that stuff for years and years. And it turns out now she's a carnivore. And when she stopped eating all plants and just focused on meat and eggs, she literally bloomed. It's like you uncovered this tiny little withered plant and she just bloomed and blossomed and just turned into this beautiful human. Her mental health, her physical appearance, her physical health, everything transformed when she stopped eating the plant foods. And so she was basically had multiple food intolerances to plant-based foods, but she was misdiagnosed with an eating disorder. And so my question is, how do you think that's more common than we perhaps know? Or is it that young people, when they eat certain foods, it hurts their tummy and they're like, no, I mean, any mammal knows if something hurts your tummy, you don't eat that. And so she learned quickly, okay, avoid all that stuff and just eat these few little picky options. Well, obviously her parents weren't okay with that. And she was very slender. So they took her to the doctor, et cetera, et cetera. How often do you think that people are diagnosed with eating disorders when in reality what they have is intolerances to certain foods that cause symptoms that make them avoid those foods, number one. And then number two, do you think the standard American diet, the highly processed, carbohydrate-filled, plant-based diet, encourages or perhaps even causes eating disorders in people who otherwise, if they were allowed to self-select the food, they would never develop an eating disorder. What say you?
Wow, I mean, those are really, really good questions, first of all. And those are questions that I wish more people were asking, because I think there's a reason that, anorexia specifically has the highest mortality rate of any eating or any psychiatric disorder, right? More people will die of anorexia than schizophrenia or any other disorder. And statistically, over 50% of people relapse. And why I'm saying these statistics, I think you have to ask, are 50% of people really not wanting to get better, or really just, there was a really interesting article written that the doctor that was writing the article said, we have to figure out why people, they were talking specifically about anorexics, when they go into treatment and they become weight restored, the second they're out of treatment, they just drop weight like a rock. Like, what's going on? And I think that talks about exactly what you said. They're in pain. They're hurting. I think one reason people starve themselves, and obviously there's many different reasons, and I don't want to downplay that this is certainly the only cause. Sure. But like you said, it hurt when I was in treatment and I was fed the standard American diet. I suffered so bad. I had so much bloating, gas, constipation, and then diarrhea. I mean, literally like bent over. And like you said, it's the second you're out of treatment, you're like, oh, thank God, I don't want to feel that anymore. So as opposed to, saying, it's my hypothesis that, like, what if we fed every person with, an eating disorder, a very highly bioavailable, nutrient dense diet that doesn't have those things that irritate your gastrointestinal lining. It doesn't take a genius, even though they literally did a study on this. I feel like my 6-year-old niece could tell you, like, hey, if you're binging and purging or you're restricting, you're going to have intestinal damage. You're going to have your stomach damage. So throwing sugar and flour and processed things on top of a damaged gut hurts. It hurts. And that's if you're really lucky and you have no food intolerances, which is almost no human on the planet. So yeah, to answer your question, I think a lot of people, like, if you were fed in a way that imagine, like, anybody listening to this that has an eating disorder, knows somebody with an eating disorder, imagine if you all of a sudden were eating in a way where you stopped thinking about food. Like, that was probably the miracle that happened to me when I switched to the carnivore diet. Was I didn't feel like I was standing on the sidelines of my own life, like constantly calculating, what did you eat? What did you not eat? Like, it's amazing that the transformation that can happen. So yes, I do think a lot of people are potentially have more just like food intolerances and is diagnosed as an eating disorder. And then I think people who maybe truly have, all the DSM-5 symptoms of whether it's anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating disorder, being fed the standard American diet, one, there's no science that the standard American diet is helpful for, I was going to say any condition. Someone's going to prove me wrong, but certainly for eating disorders.
No, I think any condition would be the proper thing to say. There's and that goes for any diet recommended by any organization, the ADA diet, the American Heart Association DASH diet. If you start to actually look at the research, first of all, if there is any, which in many cases there's zero, or in the case of the DASH diet, the research is very preliminary in very few people, very short time. You can't use that to say this is the proper human diet. We have proven it. And so would you say that just expecting all humans on the planet to eat the carbohydrate heavy, plant-based standard American diet, does that increase someone's risk of developing an eating disorder? And I realize eating disorders are multifactorial. There's multiple causes, no doubt about that.
Sure.
But is because, some of those things, especially as a child, you can't do anything about that. Yeah. If it's a home situation, a parent situation, whatever, but you can do something about the food. Do you think there's a percentage of people that if they were allowed to just self-choose what foods they eat and what foods they avoid, they would not have developed an eating disorder, whereas otherwise they're expected to clean their plate, they're expected to eat the rainbow, they're expected to have all, all the food groups. Does that increase the risk of eating disorders?
I think it can. And, I can tell you what we know. We do know that there are certain people that just don't utilize glucose well in the brain, and it manifests differently. Yeah, like a great example is epilepsy. Babies have epilepsy. It's not that the babies ate a bad diet. They just were born with the genetic ability. Yes. Their brain cannot utilize glucose. So you feed them, any type of glucose, and they have a seizure. And so nobody's blaming the babies. They're just saying, hey, we're going to make sure that you have a very low carbohydrate. You put the same child on a ketogenic diet, they stop seizing.
Yes.
And a lot of times medications can't even do that. So, there's a lot of theories that people with anxiety, with major depression, with schizophrenia, you put them on a lower carbohydrate diet, you allow the brain to utilize ketones, all of a sudden they do so much better. And I've seen that in myself, someone with the history of an eating disorder. I've seen that in many people struggling with anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder. There's just a case series that was published, I think, a year or two ago, that 3 people with lifelong binge eating disorder were put on a ketogenic diet and had remission. So yes, to answer your question, we can't ask people to be eating these things that are not only going to irritate their gut, but are going to potentially alter their brain chemistry, right? Of course, they're not going to want to eat that. Of course, they're going to be afraid to eat that, And so every species has a species-specific diet. I don't know. As humans, we seem to really struggle wrapping our heads around that humans have a species. Most people, I have a tortoise. Her name is Gertie. Most people know, oh, yeah, your tortoise she can't have, whatever. She has to eat kale and whatever. That's cool. My dog, Jackson, he has a species-specific diet. Okay, well, humans, oh, no, humans can eat whatever.
Yeah, that never ceases to amaze me, that human beings think that they're somehow magical. No, we can eat whatever. We can eat the rainbow because we're humans. And there is a species-specific diet for humans as well. Here's a question from Amber. Why is a high fiber recommended in the daily diet if you have to have a low fiber diet to prepare for a colonoscopy?
Yeah, so, why is high fiber diet recommended in general? I'll tell you. I actually had a dietitian, some of the dumbest things people ever told me that the only thing that he truly believed, he would always believe, was that a high fiber diet was good for everybody. And
that's so funny because the research supporting a high fiber diet is trivial.
Yeah, they actually have shown that high fiber diet doesn't really even improve constipation.
Exactly, right. It's really not even good for that. Yeah, totally agree. Okay, here's one more good question. What does it mean to pee neon yellow the day after starting a vitamin B complex for vitamin B12 deficiency?
That just means you're peeing it out. I mean, anytime your urine goes really kind of bright after a multivitamin means your body's flushing it out. You're not using all of it. The B vitamins are water soluble, meaning your body will kind of take what it needs and then you pee the rest out.
Yeah. Now, Briar Rose, that doesn't mean that you're absorbing none of it.
Oh no, you should be absorbing some of it for sure. But it's just
you're eating more than your gut can absorb, so you're going to lose that through the kidneys, and the B vitamins can make your urine a very entertaining neon yellow. Absolutely true. Okay, let's talk about the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Let's talk about them for a minute. So a lot of people don't know who that is, first of all. So that's the governing body over registered dietitians. And I know it's much like the American Medical Association. You don't actually have to be a member to be a doctor. And the A&D, you don't have to be a member to be a dietitian. But the majority, I think, probably are members, and they're proud of that. So tell us what we need to know about the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And please don't pull any punches.
Well, it's got a pretty long, gross history. I mean, we could do a whole thing on this, but it was basically started by a woman who had visions from God. At least that's what she thought, that told her that meat was bad and plants were good, and started this whole university. And it's really wild. I have a whole chapter on this in my book, but, fast forward to today, the Academy of Nutrition is heavily sponsored by processed food companies. When I became a dietitian, the number one sponsors were Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Frito-Lay. Today they've added Splenda, Sara Lee. National Confectionery Association literally is sponsored by Candy. And, what they have always said is, it's we believe in moderation, And I think that's what is the most dangerous, right? Because, if you're sponsored by Coca-Cola, most dietitians aren't going to go into a patient room and say hey, have a Coke. But if a patient says yeah, I drink Coca-Cola, is that okay? A dietitian will say oh yeah, in moderation, which of course is totally arbitrary, has no definition. And we know that our bodies and brains do not moderate sugar and processed foods well. So it's a very corrupt institution, in my opinion. They literally came out with an article this last year. not only are they sponsored by, but they are literally investing in like Nestle and
Yep.
like the high sugar foods. And the fact that more dietitians aren't against this is really surprising to me.
So if the A&D, if they are literally investing their money buying stock in Kellogg's and Pepsi, then also they're sponsored by those guys. People don't really understand. I mean, think about that, what that means. And so if somebody gave the A&D proof, here's a paper that literally proves that the sugar in Pepsi and Kellogg's and whoever sponsors them and whoever they actually own stocks in, that stuff is a habit forming. And it absolutely leads to a long list of chronic medical diseases. They would have to divest all of the investments. They'd have to sell all the stock, and they would have to start to refuse. It'd be like Alcoholics Anonymous taking a sponsorship from Budweiser.
Yes.
Basically, it's exactly the same. And so they would have to tell all the sugar companies, look, we don't want your money, and we're going to sell all your stocks. This would be a huge financial upheaval for the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. They're not going to do that.
No.
What are they going to? I mean, so at some point you have to say they are at least to some degree corrupt. Is that the right word?
I think corrupt is the right word because we have evidence. Like we know that that carbohydrates, somebody with type 2 diabetes should not have carbohydrates, right? Your body can no longer tolerate carbohydrates. And this, governing board has made a guideline saying we are going to teach them to have carbohydrates every single meal and snack and dose them with insulin. It's okay to have a Pop-Tart or granola bar or whatever. But that's what happens when you have stocks or you have shareholders. You now have a fiduciary responsibility to those shareholders. So They literally, they have to advocate for the sugar companies because they've invested in them, right?
Yep,
and so
absolutely.
It's horrible. It's really gross and corrupt. Like you said, it would be like Alcoholics Anonymous investing in Budweiser, tequila. Like you can't invest in something that has contradicts what you're supposed to be doing. But, there's a ton of money in keeping people sick. And the Academy.
There are many people out there who believe in Alcoholics Anonymous and what they do.
Yeah.
What if you found out, and there are many people who are recovering alcoholics or who have a family member who's a recovering alcoholic. What if you found out, what if in the New York Times tomorrow, there was a huge article that said, the Alcoholics Anonymous, they've actually been investing in Budweiser and Coors and Jack Daniels. And also they've been taking huge sponsorship money from Jack Daniels and Jim Beam and Budweiser. Would your opinion about Alcoholics Anonymous change? Mine would. I'd be like, okay, so you're just one of those kind of people. I need to not hold you to high esteem anymore. And I think the A&D, I think they've really shot theirself in the foot on this one. I think you're exactly right about that. M. Smith says, is pasta made from heart of palm a good option? There are no other added ingredients.
Hey, yeah, if you're, I know a lot of people do carbohydrate substitutes, right? Like cauliflower rice or something that is heart of palm. I'm thinking that's like the artichoke or something. If you are not intolerant to those foods, I think that's fantastic. If you're following like a ketogenic diet, I'm all about that.
Yeah, just keep in mind, no matter what food you eat, no matter how natural it sounds, you've got to count the carbohydrates. And heart of palm for 100-gram serving, which is like 3.5 ounces, I think it's got 26 grams of carbs, 17 grams of which are sugar. So
then
you count the carbs. You got to count the carbs, regardless of how natural and how exotic that it sounds. All right, now you're a registered dietitian. Do you believe that, at least in some people, sugar follows the addiction model, as do other drugs? Sugar, highly processed carbohydrates. Is there such thing as sugar addiction, carb addiction, junk food addiction?
Yes, there is. And that's, what's interesting about that is I was taught as a dietitian that doesn't exist. Like people literally would tell me like, oh, that's ridiculous, kind of poo-poo that concept. But I've seen it in my own practice. And I think we've made a lot of people suffer that are like, I should be able to eat one cookie and stop, or I should be able to eat a bowl of cereal and stop. But two things are happening when you eat carbohydrates. And this is whether you have an addiction or not. Like one, anytime you have, any type of carbohydrate, your blood sugar is going to increase. And when you have those highly processed cookies, crackers, whatever, when your blood sugar crashes, you can kind of get dizzy, shaky. then you're going to crave more. Your body sends signals like, oh crap, our blood sugar is low. We need to eat more. And for some people, it can actually alter their brain chemistry. We've seen people eating a lot of the highly processed foods, like chips, cookies. It can actually switch. There's several, but the neurotransmitters, glutamate and GABA, it can actually make glutamate go 100 times higher than what it's supposed to do. And that literally overrides your brain and your body's ability to stop eeating. And so we've told people, oh, this isn't, it's just you can be able to do this. And so we've shamed people, and when the answer is, don't do that. Stop eating that. There's no reason to eat processed foods. And some people can, and have no problem. But the more, and our foods are, they're engineered to be addictive, right? They're engineered. Most of us, myself included, have overeaten on certain things. So yes, I absolutely believe foods can be addictive, and certain people would benefit from just complete abstinence of processed foods.
I totally agree with that. Now, here's a question along that same vein. What about non-nutritive sweeteners like aspartame? What about sucralose? What about stevia, monk fruit, other sweeteners? Do you think the non-nutritive sweeteners can also, at least in some people, have a habit-forming aspect or an addiction aspect and cause them to binge eat when otherwise they wouldn't, or cause them to overeat when otherwise they would not, or cause them to be hungry when otherwise they would not?
Yeah, I do think in some people, and I think this is where if you're not sure, I think you should be really honest with yourself. Because I know some people that, will use electrolyte drinks that have stevia or monk fruit and are totally fine. They're like, hey, I have no problem. I have one electrolyte drink, like an element tea or something. And then I've known some people that say, like, I was following a ketogenic diet, eating totally whole foods, and then I went and ate a keto treat and ate the whole thing. Yep. So, and that was in a, had stevia or had fake sugar or whatever. Yeah. And as far as like how good for you are some of these fake sugars, I don't think we really know if they're good for you or bad for you, whatever. So if you're not sure, what I would do is, give yourself, if you're curious, you can give yourself permission to see. But if you're like, man, every time I eat a keto treat, I can't stop, or I eat some and I feel crappy, like, once again, it may not be for you.
I totally agree. Catwoman says, is taking a collagen powder supplement a waste of money?
Interestingly, I don't necessarily think so. Depending, I'm a collagen fan. Bone broth is one of the best ways to get collagen if you're able to either make your own bone broth or buy bone broth. But I've heard a lot of people and there are some studies that collagen, just taking a scoop of collagen a day, like a 10-gram scoop, can actually be good for your hair and nails. Just because we don't eat collagen, it's very rare for people to be like gnawing on animal tissue and stuff.
Yep. And I actually encourage people to do just that, to gnaw.
Okay, yeah, that would be ideal.
Chicken bone, to eat the membrane off your ribs,
yep,
to eat the little membrane in the inside of an eggshell. I recommend people eat all that and get collagen that way. But yes, I agree with you. If you're just not going to do any of that, then collagen powder would not be a waste of money. But if you understand that all of the building blocks for collagen are in the gristle in your steak, that's literal collagen for free. And if you're willing to push that to the side and not eat it, then yeah, you maybe want to take a collagen supplement.
Yeah, and actually, I think that's a really good point. People ask me about supplements a lot. I mean, do food first. Taking like a half an ounce of liver is worth a whole bottle of the 100%. Liver capsules, right? Eating that at the end of the steak, that, like you said, the gristle, is probably worth several scoops of collagen. So I'm a big fan of food first, for sure.
Absolutely. What supplements, if any, do you take as a registered dietitian, Michelle?
Yeah, I do calcium and magnesium. Those are two that I do daily. And I would say too, is someone who's super active. Oh, and I don't know if you count salt. I guess that's a real food, but I do salt quite a bit. So
I think the oldest archaeological evidence of salt mining by humans, we were definitely mining salt out of the ground 13,000 years ago. There's probably way longer back than that, but we have archaeological evidence that we were mining salt 13,000 years ago. So therefore, I think you can probably consider that an ancestrally appropriate food. James says, is there any benefit for ketovore carnivores using supplements like berberine, chromium, to decrease blood glucose and therefore insulin, maybe to blunt the dawn phenomenon, or in general? What's your take on that?
Yeah, there were a few papers that came out several years ago about like cinnamon. They were saying like, hey, cinnamon can decrease blood glucose. But when you looked at the actual study, it was like you'd have to take like 4 tablespoons of cinnamon.
And it's got to be
Um,
real cinnamon. Can't
yeah,
just be the,
the
it's got to be
whatever. And so I am less familiar. I'm familiar with chromium. I'm less familiar with the other one. So my answer would be, honestly, I don't know. My intuition would be you're probably better off saving your money and just, really focusing on real whole foods. But yeah, I don't know of any specific studies that talk about either one of those.
Yeah. And James, if you're still type 2 diabetic currently or pre-diabetic currently, and you're having high blood sugars, then maybe the berberine and chromium, they might help lower the blood sugar a little bit. But ultimately, your metabolism is going to heal if you keep eating a proper human diet strictly enough for long enough. And then also never forget that the dawn phenomenon that's a normal physiological process that happens to literally every single mammal on the planet, not just humans, not just diabetics. Every mammal has the dawn phenomenon every morning. And what you'll notice as your metabolism heals is that the dawn, you're not going to spike as high with the dawn phenomenon as you did back when you were metabolically ill. Yeah. All right, beautiful. Now, what I'd love to hear from you, Michelle Hurn, registered dietitian. I would love for you to share with us some of the dumbest things that you've heard registered dietitians say to patients, or tell you that they told their patients that, or they do it.
Well, I can tell you the dumbest thing. I was thinking about this, at least the top several that was recently sent to me. I get a lot of messages from angry dietitians on my social media. I actually had a dietitian tell me that using the words obesity and obese was discriminatory against people with various body types. So just using the word obesity. So I let this particular individual know, 1, that's a clinical term, and 2, that's ridiculous. So I think, as dietitians have failed, like it's just failing, 93% of the population is metabolically unhealthy. Only 7% statistically is metabolically healthy. And so I think people are angry, but, that's
understandably so.
Yeah. And then I had somebody tell me that, I would have heart disease or die of heart disease on a ketogenic diet. I've had people tell me that my brain would stop functioning if I stopped eating carbohydrates.
And these are registered dietitians.
Yeah, these are all registered dietitians, and this is when I initially went, interesting. And I guess a couple of these dietitians are actually obese themselves, so it's interesting to tell somebody who's not obese that they're going to die. There's a little lack of humility there.
Right.
Having the coworker tell me that, is pretty much the saving grace. Fiber is what's going to save the human race, which is so interesting because, if you look at studies like, they'll tell you like fiber binds LDL, fiber gets LDL the bloodstream. It's like, well, we actually know that more LDL can actually be beneficial to you. So it's like, do we really want to decrease LDL? Of course, that's in context, if as long as you're metabolically healthy.
Sure.
Gosh, I mean, you name it. It's just probably the biggest and most annoying thing is most dietitians really want people to be able to eat everything in moderation. Like I hear that all the time. And if we tell people not to, then we're mean, we're hurting their feelings, we're, not being inclusive. It's just.
And that must really be drummed into you guys in dietitian school, that you must recommend that there's no food that's off limits. You have to eat everything in moderation, eat the rainbow, smoke a little crack in moderation, have just a shot or 2 of Jack Daniels in moderation, and that must be, is that the first thing you hear on the first day of dietitian school?
I honestly can't remember. It probably is, and it's interesting because it's every disease state. Like the more I've I've been in this field, I find it fascinating that you would recommend that for, everything from a child that is trying, failing to thrive to someone who's dying of diabetes, like everything in moderation, like that. That's insane. You would never do that for a doctor. You wouldn't prescribe the same, surgeries or whatever for it makes absolutely no sense. Specifically for diseases of carbohydrate intolerance, you should, I mean, once again, it's like, what if you're lactose intolerant? You can't tolerate milk. You wouldn't be like, well, let's have milk 5 times a day and we'll give you a, anti-lactose pill. You'd be like, no, just avoid that.
I've always thought it fascinating that dietitians, they absolutely honor lactose intolerance.
Sure.
So lactose is milk sugar, but they're like, oh yes, that person has lactose intolerant. Do not offer them milk. But then if it's another sugar, like if it's glucose intolerance, which I think that's what type 2 diabetes is, it's chronic carbohydrate toxicity or chronic glucose toxicity or sensitivity. They can understand how you could be intolerant of one sugar, but not another. I find that just to be fascinating.
I do too, and I also, the good question, can you eat too much protein and it raises your daily glucose numbers too high? Well, we do know, protein can break down to glucose, right? So it is really important. Like if you're somebody that has type 2 diabetes, you do want to make sure you get fat. You really want to prioritize not only animal protein, but fat. Because, if you're looking at how what foods raise your blood sugar, you will get a little bit of a rise from protein, much more level from fat. So, but compared to carbohydrates, it's negligent. Carbohydrates is like a mountain compared to protein.
Absolutely. I totally agree. If you're still eating carbohydrates, then don't even ask me this question, because the carbohydrates are going to spike your blood sugar 10 times higher. So it's not even worth worrying about this at all. Tell us about the protein project, Michelle. I heard you're doing something with this. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I started, I think this was last year that I got a little frustrated, when you're working in this field, and I didn't feel like, I wanted to give back. Like I wanted to do something. And so, one thing that really, I feel like an area of the population that just, doesn't get enough protein, people that are depending on food banks or food pantries, potentially people dealing with lower income. And, unfortunately, even in my community, we're seeing a rise. We're seeing inflation, gas prices are through the roof, food prices are through the roof. And so the need for animal-based protein is higher than ever. And if you go to a food bank, you probably, if you've been or volunteered, so many carbohydrates, beans, rice, cookies, crackers, cereals.
It's all carbohydrates. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Nisha and I, we actually go out of our way. We'll buy a bunch of cans of tuna, sardines, stuff like that, and we'll take that to the food bank, just so they at least have got a protein and a fat option, because otherwise they're going to walk out with a bag full of carbohydrates with a side of carbohydrates with sugar on top.
Yes, exactly. And that's
not nutrition.
No, that's not. It's almost like a cycle of keeping people sick, potentially the people that maybe need it the most, that have the least access. We're kind of like keeping this cycle going. So the goal of the protein project is like, how can I connect people in my community, like the farmers, to the food bank? And so, so what I have done, there's a farmer, Windy River Livestock, that this guy is awesome. And so, I raised money, and what he does is he's giving me cuts of food and ground beef, potentially maybe that's not selling as well, and giving me a big price discount. Like, because, grass-fed, regenerative farm ground beef can be $8-10 a pound. And so I'm getting it for like, $2 to $4. And so I've been able to take that directly to the food bank. And so, they have meat, they have frozen meats that, and if I had all the money in the world, I'd love to do it daily. It's something that we're doing about twice a month. Yep. And the director of the food bank said it doesn't last the first day, Yep. So people just come in, and even they have to limit how much people can have, like only one pound per family, because they have over 150 families coming in daily. But yeah, the goal just being like,
I love that.
Thank you. And it's like, and people are like, oh, I'm honored, and I'd love if people wanted to donate to my project. But if everyone, if you're not sure what to do, just do like you and Nisha are doing, like get some protein. If your food bank will allow you to bring frozen stuff, I think that's great. If not, every food bank will take sardines, canned tuna, canned chicken,
Yep. And so food banks in larger cities will take frozen stuff, but in small communities like ours, they don't have the facilities for that. So it's only canned or, freeze dried, not freeze dried, but to like packaged stuff.
Yeah.
And so I would love to take this opportunity, and you'd probably echo this, to challenge everybody who listens to this video. If you're looking for a charitable thing that you can do that'll actually make a known difference in people's lives, that will literally make a difference tomorrow in that person's life, start taking canned protein and fat to the food bank.
Yes.
Salmon, sardines, tuna, any of the canned fish. You can actually also get ground or canned ham, canned beef, any of that stuff. Take that to the food bank, because not everybody's donating food, but they're not that well. They're donating food, right, Michelle? Because it's not really food. But these people, they need every advantage they can to try to get back in the saddle, to try to get back in the race. And they're not going to be able to do that living on the big, 5-pound bags of fake Alphabet cereal and Lucky Charms cereal. That's not going to get their brain sharp enough to get back in the race. So please, all you guys, if you're looking for something to make the world a better place, once a week, once a month, start taking a bunch of cans of canned meat to your local food bank, and let that be your donation to make the world a better place. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. And you know what? It can be so, and if you're like, God, I don't know, just Google. I had no idea. Honestly, there were so many food banks just in my area. Just Google wherever you live, even if you kind of live out there. And, you know, for me, it's become a pretty special thing. Like, you know, I know the director of the food bank, and, you know, by first name. I know my farmer by first name, but if you're not going to get from a farmer, but you taking 10, 20, whatever cans a week, a month, whatever you do, like, it's just, you know, when you get your health back and you're on the right track and you have this information, like, paying it forward is, I think, one of the best things we can do for each other.
Absolutely. Tanya says that she loved the Dietitian's Dilemma, as did I. Tanya, that when I read the Dietitian's Dilemma, that's how I knew Michelle was our kind of people. I'm like, oh yeah, she's one of us. She gets it. Where's the Dietitian's Dilemma available if somebody wanted to get a copy of your book?
Yeah, so my book, The Dietitian's Dilemma, is on Amazon. So we have the paperback. If you're kind of old school like me, there's an ebook, and then I also have the Audible version.
I love it. I love it. I'm scrolling through to see if I can find another good question or two. We talked about that. Okay. Anything that you want to specifically share with us, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, the only other things I would share is, you know, when it comes to eating disorders, you know, I think, and this, like, it's a really touchy, emotional topic, but I think, we have to be open to, like, what we're doing right now isn't working. You know, so many people are sick, so many people are relapsing.
Yep.
You know, if you had told me when I was a teenager in my 20s, like, hey, look, if you follow this low carb way of eating, and it doesn't have to be like pure carnivore forever, you know, you can, you know, I've been able to add foods back in, but I'm not able, you know, I'm relatively limited, but it's a beautiful life. I get to eat meat and fat and some select carbohydrates and live my life. Like, that's all people should want to do.
I love that. And I think the reintroduction idea is absolutely spot on. Tell us which foods that you've been able to reintroduce that literally cause you no problems, and which foods you've tried to reintroduce that you're like, oh no, that's not going to work for me.
Yeah. So after doing, like, you know, just pure meat and fat, the things that I can do pretty easily are some select fruits. Like, I do some berries. I've done, you know, it's honestly, even some of the high sugar fruits, I don't do well with. I don't do well with, like, the pineapples or the mangoes. I know our buddy Dr. Saladino likes to eat lots of those, but I don't do well. Some of the, like, white rice, totally fine. Potatoes, not at all. Like, just massive diarrhea, cramps, whatever. A lot of the vegetables, like, I don't really do nightshades. You know, and it's interesting because I tried and you just feel achy and gross, and, you know, I don't really do a lot of lettuces. But, you know, I guess I'll just tell you things we really do frequently is my wife makes some long fermented sourdough bread. We have that once in a while, and white rice. Those are the majority of my carbohydrates. I also have some carrots. We actually grow carrots, a little bit of cabbage. That's about it when it comes to vegetation. And that's, I mean, that could be a whole nother, we get, you know, I get most of my nutrition from animal products. I don't depend on rice or carrots for my nutrition. That's a terrible idea. I mean, plant-based diets are just so bad for the human body.
In so many ways. Here's a great question. I think it can tie back into eating disorders as well, because as you and I both know, they're multifactorial. It's not just the food. We're not saying that it is. So Richard says, I was told in the community by a registered nurse that the right diet could reverse my PTSD. I'm skeptical because I have this, and I can't see how any diet can erase 10 years of childhood sex abuse.
Yeah.
And my answer to that, Richard, would be it can't. It can't
Yeah,
erase
I was
it.
going to say.
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
No, people ask, wow, are you 100% healed from an eating disorder? No, I had some pretty severe trauma as a young person, and I don't think you will ever be, quote unquote, like, you're not going to not remember the abuse you experienced. But when they say reverse, I would more along the lines of say, like, you can live a beautiful, fulfilling life where it doesn't consume you. That to me is like what recovery is. Like, I'm not constantly thinking about food, and potentially, if you were able to like stabilize your blood sugar, stabilize your brain, whatever you can do diet wise, like, you would be able to live a better life. But, I don't think I would agree with you. I don't think any way of eating is going to erase, your history.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that applies for eating disorders as well, because many times there's trauma involved and other psychosocial stressors. I think what the registered nurse meant to say was that you can quite possibly decrease the severity of your PTSD symptoms. And in many cases, you and I both know, Michelle, that we've seen mental health improve to the point that although the trauma's still there, you still know that, but you're so much mentally healthier because you're getting plenty of healthy animal fat and all the good things that can do for your brain, that you're able to, I wouldn't say compartmentalize the trauma, but you're able to just see it for what it is. That's something that happened to me, and it was terrible, and I still have problems with that, but I'm still also able to grow as a person and to move past that slowly, hopefully, surely. Would you agree with that? And what would you add?
Kind of like, I'm no longer sitting on the sidelines of my own life. Like, it no longer consumes me. Like, I can't work. I can't go to functions. Everything is about this disorder, where when you're able, once again, to heal your body and your brain, it's not perfect and it doesn't totally go away, but you're able to, oh my gosh, I can have a job again. I can have a relationship again. I can, I have moments where I just feel okay.
Yeah.
And to me, like, that's all I ever wanted. So that's what I've been able to experience.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing this information with us and sharing parts of your story that I know it's got to be a little bit uncomfortable sometimes to share some of that stuff. But I think you're making the world a better place by sharing that, even though it's got to be a little uncomfortable for you.
Yeah,
And I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much. And I just wish we had more MDs that advocated this way. And yeah, I'm grateful. It's really hard. Like, once you get your health back, not want to share. I hope more, dietitians and health professionals follow suit.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michelle Hurn, for doing this. The Dietitian's Dilemma. It's available on Amazon. There is an Audible, right, for people with ADHD? Yes, I thought so.
Yes.
That's excellent. And any future plans to do anything else, like another book or anything else?
Maybe, I don't know. People have asked me potentially another book at some point, but I have been invited to go to Washington, D.C. to join up with Dr. Finney and Jeff Wolek and a few other people. We're going to be drafting a policy to add low carb nutrition as part of the dietary guidelines, since
Very nice.
It's been failing to get them to take over the dietary guidelines. So at least we're going to try to make some headway, and that's in June.
I love it. I love it. I can't wait to see what comes of that. Thank you so much, Michelle. Guys, this was recorded live in our private group, and our tribe members got to ask Michelle their questions. If you'd like to do this with future experts like this one, then join the tribe. There's a link down in the show notes. And also, I'm going to have a link to Michelle's book down in the show notes and to her social media as well. Thank you so much, Michelle. See you next time.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.